And outside of having access to that equipment, there really isn't a reliable way to know what your predominant fiber type is or what the predominant fiber type of a particular muscle is. So that may sound bad. It's like, oh no, I can't have access to this information. How am I going to optimize my training for the fiber types I have? And here's the good news. You don't need to. Based on the research we have, doesn't seem to matter very much. There's this popular idea that dates back decades and decades that if you train in a manner that seems to lean into the physiological characteristics of a particular fiber type, you will predominantly stress that particular fiber type, leading to more growth and maybe larger strength gains as well. So type 1 fibers are more endurant, they're more fatigue resistant. So the idea being if you do really high rep training, that's going to predominantly stress your type 1 fibers, leading to more type 1 fiber growth, and vice versa. Type 2 fibers, they're more powerful. They don't actually seem to be that much stronger. That's a common misconception when you scale for fiber size. Maximal contractile force is either the same in type 1 and type 2 fibers or only very slightly higher in type 2 fibers, whatever. But they are definitely more powerful. They have a greater shortening velocity. So the idea being if you do heavy training or power training, that's going to predominantly stress your type 2 fibers, leading to more type 2 growth. And some people even push it farther and say like, oh, well, type 2 fibers seem to be more prone to hypertrophy than type 1 fibers are. So like you really need to lean into power-based training in order to fully grow your type 2 fibers. And that's the ticket to huge gains. Anyways, best I can tell, those recommendations were pulled from someone's asshole and weren't actually based on any actual evidence. Studies where people are exposed to different styles of training, biopsies are taken, and you actually look to see like, hey, does this style of training affect fiber type, specific type 1 and type 2 fiber growth better or worse than this other style of training? Those studies have come around really within like the last decade or so for the most part. And for the vast majority of them find it doesn't really matter. There is one kind of outlier study you can point to. I believe it was the high load, low load study by Schwenke in 2012. Should have put this in the notes. I'm pretty sure that's the study I have in mind though. But that study did find way, way more type 2 fiber growth with heavier training than lighter training. And so like that is a study people will sometimes point to. But best I can tell, the overall findings of that study have never been replicated. So that is the one study where high load, like 8 RM training, led to way more growth than low load 20 RM training. That's the only study that's ever found that. Every other study I've seen where people take loads above about 30% of 1 RM, do the same number of sets to failure, tend to find similar overall hypertrophy between kind of heavier or moderate load training and low load training. That's the one study that didn't. And that's also the one study where there did maybe seem to be a fiber type specific growth response. So until more studies have overall results that are similar to that study, I personally don't put too much stock in it. All of the other research in the area tends to suggest low load training is good for growing your type 1 fibers, also good for growing your type 2 fibers. Heavier training, good for growing your type 2 fibers, also good for growing your type 1 fibers. So it doesn't really seem like you need to train in a specific way to optimize type 1 versus type 2 fiber growth. You can't really figure out your fiber type breakdown with non-invasive tests and without expensive lab equipment. But the good news is that you don't need to. You just train, and both of your fiber types seem to grow just fine.